Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Cabinet meeting of Wednesday, the 6th of December. Do I have any apologies for absence? I think we've got Councillor Shaw joining us online. Councillor Blacker, I believe, is online too. There are no urgent matters. As is my usual request, there are goal papers for today's meeting. So if at any stage you do wish to refer to the confidential items in any of the paper appendices, then please do indicate to me prior to doing so. If we do, we will have to ask that the gallery is cleared and turn off the live stream, which is obviously less than ideal, but if necessary, necessary. So please do bear that in mind. Are there any declarations of interest? I don't believe so. In that case, I ask the Cabinet move to the minutes. If there are any corrections. If not, are they agreed? Thank you. There are no appointments to subcommittees or to outside bodies. So agenda item number 7, cessation of the use of Marsden Court. Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. As the Council's Cabinet member with responsibility for safe and genuinely affordable homes, it comes to me to make sure that we are delivering that across the borough. We agreed in the Council plan earlier this year that we would decommission Marsden Court because we felt that the quality of the units both there and at Meath were not in line with the standards that we have set for ourselves and that we would wish for our residents. So this report sets the background as to how we got to the position with bringing about Marsden Court in the first place, and looks to make a decision to end that usage ahead of its current end of lease, which is 2027. We are already moving people out at both Marsden and Meath Courts, and they are liaising with me on a regular basis as we are progressing with that, and we are looking to try and get families out as a priority at both locations, and a number of them will be moved before Christmas, if not very soon after. I believe the opposition have some questions.
I believe they do. Councillor Gallant.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've just got 2 questions. Do you agree that Marsden and Meath Courts were experimental accommodation and that they should have been built with a much better and appropriate maintenance plan, which would have avoided the current embarrassing situation? And the second question is, a lot of the families are concerned about where they're going to go. They've built up local links. How are you going to accommodate them at such short notice?
Councillor Mahfouz.
Thanks. So I've obviously visited both sites, spoken to families at both locations, and they're also continuing to stay in touch regularly as well. So we've given that commitment that we are going to support them in terms of those moves, and where support is required, we'll make sure that that's in place. I'm ensuring that that's happening, and you've obviously got Nikki Fielder here as well, who's working on that side by side with me to make sure that we're doing that. Huge thank you to the team that are pretty much working tirelessly right now to ensure that in the middle of probably the worst housing crisis I've ever seen, where we've got half the number of private rented accommodation have been taken off the market because of the disastrous management of the economy, disastrous budget that we had just over a year ago by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. We're in a situation where more and more families are turning up on our doorsteps to try and put a roof over their head because the market is completely and utterly broken, and those families and their situations are broken. And I've got people crying on the phone almost daily to me because of where this government is leaving families every single day, kicking them out on the streets because of the poor decisions that they've made in government. And we are the ones picking up the tabs for that, but we are making sure that we will do the right thing by these families in the coming weeks. And certainly if you speak to any of the families at either Marsden or Meath Court who have been in touch with me, I would expect that they would say that I'm right behind them, making sure that we are making the right decisions in these circumstances.
Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 2.3, it talks about the decanting. Now, you've sort of referred to that a little bit. If people can't find what they would require as sort of suitable housing, will you make sure that they're not essentially forced out by a particular deadline, and that you're going to be very willing to wait a bit longer if that's needed to make sure they do get somewhere suitable, given the family status of some of them? And my second question relates to paragraph 6.1, the 5th bullet point. How come there's no break clause in there?
Councillor Mahfouz.
So yeah, absolutely. Look, I appreciate for anybody moving home, it's always a stressful time, and so no less so for these families. And so I wanted to make sure that we do that in an empathetic, sympathetic, and way, and that we show flexibility, and we're doing so in a supportive manner. And that's exactly how we're doing that. So I know that a number of families have already been made offers. They're very, very happy with those offers. But if there are any issues that we need to take into account in terms of people's needs, if they're happy to wait longer until we're able to find that type of accommodation for them, or if they're happy to move twice if need be, then then all of those things, all of those options are on the table, because we know that we need to make sure that we're putting those families' needs first and foremost. In terms of a lack of a break clause, I'm afraid I wasn't the person who negotiated the deal in the first place, and so I'm not in a position to really come back and comment on what happened at that time. But what is very, very clear for all of those residents in those blocks is that we are doing the right thing by them now. We are side by side with them to make sure that they are moved into suitable alternative accommodation, and we won't finish this work until that last family be moved out into alternative appropriate accommodation, and that we're able to decommission both sites.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mahfouz. And all I would add is that subsequent to that original decision being taken in 2014, clearly the hope that Marston and Meath courts held for us to be able to provide temporary accommodation hasn't come true, and we could see from the quality of the actual I hazard to call them buildings, that they are not. The quality of that offer is substantially less than what we would have hoped and anticipated. So it was only right that we've taken the decision, and will take the decision, to end our use of them. That was the decision that we indicated that we would take as early as 2021. And of course, that was contained in both council plans of 2022 and 2023. And I know officers, both present and past, will have experienced no less the number of conversations that we have had internally to get us to the point of ceasing the use of both. So I offer my thanks also to those officers involved in making this happen. Of course, the fundamental priority here is to make sure that we support families into alternative accommodation. I'm sure we'll discuss more of this at our full council meeting in the not too distant future, but it's worth underlining the fundamental challenges that exist within the housing market right now, and the spiralling use of temporary accommodation that we are experiencing as a consequence of a broken housing market, made worse by the financial crisis and the cost of living crisis too. There are no easy answers to ensuring that our residents have a safe, secure roof over their head if they are the most vulnerable in our society. But we have standards. Those standards are important, and we need to keep them. So with that, I thank you, Councillor Mahfouz, too, for shepherding this to this point. And I ask members to look at the recommendations of the report and ask that they're agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 8, cycle network plan, Councillor Costigan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite excited to be bringing this plan tonight because, excuse me, it's the first time ever that Ealing Council has had a borough-wide cycle network plan that has been put together using information and consultation from local residents. and it gives us a strategic map of where we would like to see cycle routes and cycle lanes across the borough that we can roll out over the next 10 years. It is a part of our promise to invest £10 million in active travel in the borough. And I want to thank all of the many residents who responded to the consultation, for which we got thousands of comments, some of which we're still working through. And also thank you to organisations such as Ealing Cycling Campaign, who have provided some very valuable feedback. It is now a draft plan, because the way we work at Ealing Council is we go out and ask residents for their views, then we take that away. We put together a plan based on those views, and then we go back and we say, did we get it right? Let us know if we heard you correctly. So that's the next stage. We're going to go back out and ask residents, does this make sense? Is this what you were expecting to see? So we'll be doing that from the beginning of January, and then hopefully in the new year, we will have a final version of our plan. Included in this also, Chair, I should say, is some points that residents raised around maintenance of cycle lanes, for example. And there's some points in there about how we will ensure that we do works on potholes at an earlier stage. We're changing our approach on that. And also we are purchasing a new footway cleaner machine, which means that we can ensure that segregated cycle routes stay easier for cyclists to get down. Thank you.
Which I have to say, I'm personally looking forward to riding along, hopefully with you, Councillor Costigan, when it arrives. I'm sure for a great photograph of us cleaning those horrible gullies, which invariably always get full of leaves at this time of year. But it's our commitment to make that happen and to clear those routes. Councillor Galante, I believe you have a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Keen cyclists, I welcome provisions as they are. 3 quick points. I've seen there's a preponderance of comments, 420 comments about the Uxbridge Road. I do agree that unless you sort the pinch points out, Southall Broadway, Iron Bridge and Ealing Broadway, you're never going to have a strategic cycle connection right the way through the borough. The second question is, are you providing cyclist training, particularly for young people and for those who may not feel very confident on bikes, to go hand in hand with all these measures? And the third question is, will there be more enforcement against poor cycling behaviour, like illegal electric bikes going through red lights and cycling on pavements?
I mean, I have to say, I suspected what was coming after Councillor Gallant said that he was a keen cyclist. But Councillor Costigan, do you perhaps want to address those issues, perhaps not contained in this report, but covered elsewhere? But go ahead.
Sure. So the Uxbridge Road, I think that's a fair question, because it's a key strategic route through the centre of the borough. And I know that we would very much like to see a clear cycle route all the way down the Uxbridge Road. But you're absolutely right. One of the issues we've got is there are various pinch points where we'll have to do a lot of in-depth design work and consultation in order to overcome some of the issues in terms of space, as you say, under the Iron Bridge and other places. However, our traffic engineers are working on that. We're working on proposals, and we're hoping that in time we will be able to deliver on a strategic route all along the Uxbridge Road. The real limiting factor, though, is actually funding, because as we outline in the report, it costs £1 million for every 1 kilometre of segregated cycleway in the borough. And the Uxbridge Road is something like 10 or 11 kilometres. So that's quite a lot of money added to, as I say, all of the work from traffic engineers and consultation, etc. So it is something that's going to take a while to deliver. So we're doing it in a phased way, which is why we started off with the route to Hanwell to Southall, and that's the bit that we're concentrating on at the moment. But I think this particular report tonight and the cycle map has put the Uxbridge Road at the heart of what we're trying to achieve, but it will take time and it will take money. The second question was on cycle training. Councillor Gallant, I don't know if you're a Twitter user or an X user, but every time I look at the Ealing Council Twitter feed, it tells you about various cycle training and cycle maintenance sessions that that we do hold throughout the borough. So that is available. Again, though, I would say that we used to have more money to do this, and we used to be able to do even more than we currently do. But some of that funding has been cut because government nationally has cut the funding to Transport for London, and we get that funding via that route. So it would be great if government nationally would put some more money into active travel and into cycle training, and then we would be able to do even more than we currently do. In terms of enforcement, and you mentioned e-bikes in particular, this has been raised a few times, I think, in this forum, and I have said that there is a big issue in terms of enforcement because there aren't particular powers or rules in place when it comes to micro-mobility. We all know that, you know, these are fairly new things, e-bikes and e-scooters. They've only been around a few years, but the government has promised on a number of occasions to put laws in place that would make it clear what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. But sadly, they bottled it. They continually bottle it and refuse to bring forward a transport bill that would make the rules clear and mean that everybody would know what the right thing to do was, and we'd be able to take action if there was a problem. Cycling on the pavement, I know former Prime Minister Johnson gotten in trouble a few times for doing that himself. So I know it's a fairly common thing, but my understanding is that it's actually something that the police have the powers to enforce against rather than the local council. So unfortunately, we can't really take any action. It is down to the police to do it. Bit of a pattern here. I'm not sure the police have the time or the resources to focus on people cycling on the pavement, when I think last year they were only able to get around to 50% of burglaries in London. Again, they're facing a funding crisis. Thank you.
Yeah, as ever, if it's moving and it's on the carriageway, it's for the police to enforce. And I'm sure, Councillor Gallant, you would be in wholehearted agreement with our attempt, as we have always tried to do, to achieve enforcement powers for things like 20 miles an hour zones and for other enforcement activity against moving vehicles. But of course, that is not what we are getting from government. In fact, a month ago, did they not, Councillor Costigan, announce a whole range of interventions in this space that are going to make it even more difficult for us to make cycling and walking that bit safer in the London Borough of Ealing? So, you know, just like on hotels, Councillor Gallant, for refugees, if you want to jointly sign a letter with Councillor Costigan and I to the Prime Minister and to the Secretary of State for Transport, calling on those powers, I mean, I will write it tonight, and you can join us. You can join us in that request. Anybody else? Councillor Mahfouz?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say was it speaks volumes without having pressed the volume button on the microphone, but it speaks volumes of Councillor Gallant's contribution that he didn't mention once the road safety measures that need to be taken to protect all of our road users. And actually, it's the dangerous drivers that are the most likely to be causing the serious accidents. And I've met the police in the past in terms of talking about close passing. And I would have thought, as a keen cyclist, as Councillor Gallant has referred to himself as, he would know that's a serious concern for any cyclist, but particularly when you're going out with smaller family members and so on and so forth. And the number of times that I've had a driver who, even though anyone will have seen me on my bike with my luminous yellow jacket and luminous yellow flashing helmet, don't see me when they pull out right in front of me. But you know, I would have expected, Councillor Gallant, better from you in terms of making sure that protection of our most vulnerable road users. And also that includes other people in their vehicles, you know, when they're driving around with their families and they're having to deal with bad driving. So fully behind Councillor Mason and Costigan in terms of making sure that we ask for the powers to be able to make our roads safer for all users.
Thankfully, the overwhelming majority of cyclists and the overwhelming majority of drivers are sensible, law-abiding folk, and they are let down by the small minority in both cohorts that make our roads that bit more dangerous. So I am sure with Councillor Gallant's support, we can get the government to change their mind. So with that, I ask that you review the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Let's move on to item number 9, Children's Services Capital Approvals. Councillor Nagpal.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the approval to progress with the Conditions Work Programme that will take place in our schools during the summer 2024 school holidays. It's an annual programme and comes to Cabinet every year around this time. In 2024, more than 40 projects are planned across the borough for works like fire doors, fire alarm systems, emergency lighting, electrical systems, heating and hot water systems, roofing, building fabric. So a lot of work happening. We said that we would invest in our schools so that every child could learn in a fit for purpose building, and we are delivering just that.
Thank you very much. I haven't seen any indications for questions from opposition members. Are there any contributions from members of the Cabinet? Other than to commend the report, we do this every year, and it's absolutely vital that we invest in our schools, and the significant amount of money that we're investing this year is a testament to that. So thank you to Councillor Nagpal and to the team for bringing this forward. I ask therefore that Cabinet members review the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Thank you very much. Item number 10, Villiers High School Places Award for Main Works Contract. Councillor Nagpal.
Thanks, Chair. So continuing with the theme of investing in our schools, this is the award of the main works contract for a new classroom block at Villiers High School. At the last Cabinet meeting, we had the annual report on school place planning, which covered the level of demand that we are seeing at secondary school level in Southall. And this scheme has been to Cabinet a couple of times previously. The contract to be awarded tonight includes the original project to attend to pre-existing shortfall of accommodation at the school, plus accommodation for an additional one form of entry, and also releases space for additionally resource provision so we can deliver the much needed spaces for children with special educational needs.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'll just take this opportunity to put on record, my thanks and also Cabinet's thanks, particularly to Aruna Sharma, the outgoing head teacher at Villiers High School, who has led that school since 2017 to be one of the best performing schools in the borough. It's why we could be so satisfied actually that almost 99% of Ealing schools are good and outstanding. It's because of solid leadership like Aruna's that's got the school to where it is. And the fact, therefore, I know from the many visits that Councillor Nagpal, you and I have made to that school, she has been pressing us consistently for her legacy of the of that school to be the buildings that are now going to come forward as part of the capital works. So, if Cabinet are happy, we can offer a vote of thanks to Aruna Sharma for her leadership at Villiers High School, and hopefully, with your agreement, having a look at the recommendations of the reports. That they're agreed. Thank you very much. So let's do item number 11, the final report of Scrutiny Panel 2, recovery from the pandemic. Councillor Ball, if you could, we're going to just say, if you could make your introduction to the report within 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll definitely be within 3 minutes. I'd like to very briefly move the report of Panel 2, which looked at economic recovery from the pandemic. Through questioning officers, local and larger businesses and academic institutions and a series of site visits, we found that there was a great deal of good work being done to help local businesses and help Ealing people into jobs, but that more partnership working and joined up activity would make those efforts from various organisations more effective. I just want to really flag up a couple of points that we found. One was the very helpful offer from UWL that emerged in one of our meetings to develop a scheme to divert young people at risk of offending into entrepreneurship, which I hope will go ahead because that does seem very useful. And the other thing that we found, which came up consistently across a number of site visits in different parts of the borough and pieces of evidence given, was the extent to which crime and antisocial behaviour is a huge problem for retail businesses right across the borough. And so I think that's certainly something that more partnership work with the police is important for. So with that, I commend my report to Cabinet.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brett, do you want to comment on any of the recommendations?
Yeah, I'm not going to kind of take them all individually. I think as Councillor Ball has mentioned, there is some great work that has already been happening. And we as a, as a council are kind of just only building on that. We're working very closely with our bids team. We've also working really closely with partners to build the different kind of skill sets that we need. We are looking at adding more entrepreneurships as well as work experience. And actually, I had a conversation for 2 hours about work experience today. So all of those things are a plethora of different stuff that we're offering. And that is all part of our kind of strategic growth strategy. And it's very much around the kind of jobs-led growth. So yeah, we're doing all of that. I think there's an ongoing issue just to talk about the kind of the police side of it. There is an ongoing issue. We're aware of that, and so are the police. So the High Streets Task Force are working closely together, as well as I know Councillor Anand will also probably want to speak to that part as well. So those things are continuing issues, not just for Ealing. I think they're across the country, and that's something that we'll be working tirelessly to try and solve. Thank you.
I think on the police side, I think it's very important for us to know that the new MAP plan is now in action, and that's lots of work that is going around trying to get all our local SNT teams embedded in the wards so that there could be a lot of engagement with the community, with the businesses, and also trying to make sure that the transparency is there and there's also presence on our streets. There was a meeting last night. This is one of the second meetings that the Mayor promised. There are 4 that is going to be around across the borough, and the one that happened last night in Southall was very successful, where a lot of the residents and businesses were there to actually hold the police accountable on some of the changes they would like to see on their engagement within the community. The third one hasn't been announced yet. Where that's going to happen is going to be another part of the borough, and I would really encourage all councillors to make sure that their residents and their businesses and the voluntary sector groups to come to these meetings so they can really engage and get a lot of information on when and how the local SNT teams will be engaging with the community.
And as you've raised it, Councillor Ball, I'm going to use this opportunity afforded to me to denounce the telecom companies who unfortunately contribute to antisocial behaviour on our high streets by using the permitted development rights afforded to them by the coalition government to keep a copious number of telephone boxes all over our high streets that aren't used but derive a revenue for telephone companies for the advertising hoarding that goes up on them. Go into any number of telephone boxes in Ealing Broadway or indeed Hanwell Broadway. They don't work, but they refuse to remove them. Why? Because they want the advertising revenue. So if only we could get some reforms to the permitted development rights over telephone boxes, we might be able to do something about it. And I join with many, many residents I know in those 2 locations and elsewhere. I see nods from cabinet members who are frankly sick to death of these boxes of, well, we won't even go into what happens in them, but it's certainly not making telephone calls. Anybody else? No? Good. Okay. So with thanks to Councillor Ball and to the scrutiny panel, I ask that Cabinet review the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. So final report then of the scrutiny panel number 3, regrow, rewild and recycle. Do we have? Oh yeah, Councillor Rice. Councillor Rice, you have 3 minutes when you are settled.
Thank you, Chair. So with the report on the regrow, rewild and recycle, I suppose you may think it'd be some kind of sequel to the climate emergency scrutiny panel that we had previously. But to me, it was far more of a sequel to active citizenship because it had such a huge focus on volunteering, which was just really fantastic. I will just thank the panel because they were just so enthusiastic themselves in coming along to so many site visits as well. First of all, we did look at the biodiversity action plan and the work that was going on there. It was very important to me to make sure that we were very much a balanced panel. So when we came to talk about our most important topic, the beavers, that I did want to have like a pro and anti kind of, didn't want to have a proper discussion about it, but but actually everybody wanted to be very pro the beavers, and that's something they were quite excited about. So it's something I do need to really pay tribute to the Ealing Wildlife Group and to Dr. Sean McCormack for all the help and all the support they've given there, because that is very much what we rely on. It's our volunteers that really make this all happen for us at the council. And then we went on to talking about trees, a whole meeting on trees. Why? It's when it comes down to trees, it's not just a matter of the fact that we're planting lots of trees, which is fantastic. We've also got to look at making sure we're planting the right trees, and also that we're going to be able to maintain them. 50,000 trees is going to take a lot of work in terms of looking after leaves. We've already discussed a bit about leaves this evening as it is. And looking at the great work as well of trees for cities and trees for streets. And I had the chance to do some work with trees for cities in my own ward, planting a tree, working with a family that working with a family that lived in a flat. They didn't have a garden for their little boys to go and do some gardening and do some planting, but they got a chance to do that there. So it's another theme that really came through. How do we look after people who are in flats, who don't have gardens, who don't have these facilities? And then we go on to looking at recycling and touching, of course, on the work of Lagercan and the work they do there. And so one thing we did do is we all went down to see the recycling sorting plant in Crayford and had a good chance to actually go through and see as the items being recycled. Another kind of thing that came out that I mentioned is that actually you look at just look at the surveys. We think it's younger people who are really leading when it comes to recycling. It's actually the older people who seem to know a little bit more about it. Now, why is that? I mean, maybe it's not just a case of the younger people aren't so interested. Maybe it's harder for us younger people because we are in the flats. You know, I'm to say about we, I'm just talking in general about the young people who are in flats because I live in a flat, that we are in flats. And so it can be harder to maybe get the food recycling, get the facilities you need in your own property and where you live. And also, when it comes down to actually getting things to the recycling
So
centre.
that's 3 minutes.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
So if we could just ask you to wrap up now.
Yes. So really, what I just have to emphasise on that it is just simply volunteering and making sure that our volunteers get the support they need. And so that's really the thing we have to look at, as well as ensuring that everybody can make their own contribution towards what we do in terms of regrowing, recycling, and rewilding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Costigan.
Thank you, Councillor Rice, and thank you to all of the scrutiny panel for all the hard work they did put in on this report over the year. And it's great to see also some nice, lovely photos of you all out and about in some of the most biodiverse areas of the borough, getting your hands dirty and looking at what Ealing has to offer, which I think is pretty exciting. I'm delighted that you couldn't find anyone who was against the beavers. That's brilliant news. And that kind of equates with my experience as well. And I know we have done great partnership work there. Obviously, it's council land, and we've done a lot of work in terms of the fencing, which people will be aware of, and working with local groups, including Ealing Wildlife Group, to make sure that we could make that project happen. So it's quite a landmark project for us. In terms of the report's recommendations, which we have accepted all of them, quite a few of them, I think, are, we've accepted them, but actually we're already doing them. So it's great. We're kind of on the same page. I know you've talked about trees, as you say, and we have completely changed how we plant trees in the borough. So back in the old days, we would plant street trees that had roots that would really cause a lot of damage to pavements. And we don't do that any longer. So we've changed the kind of trees that we plant. And I believe that officers, in fact, furnished the scrutiny committee with a whole list of the different species that we have in the borough. So we have changed already our approach on that. And we have already agreed a number of months ago now with some of our partners that we will be employing an ecology officer. We're reworking the team in parks, and we will have an ecology officer. And this is because we're so much focused now on the biodiversity action plan and making sure that we make inroads into delivering on that. Getting people involved in trees and in tree planting and all of that. There was a brilliant example of it last weekend on Horsenden Hill, where I was there myself along with some of the local councillors, and we had Trees for Cities and hundreds of local residents, and we planted over 4,000 trees. And that's really going to help us reach our 50,000 total. We're planting 4,500 more this weekend at Marnham Fields. And it's so great. It was really brilliant to see local people involved, younger, older, with their gloves provided by Trees for Cities and their shovels, and we got a lot of work done. So I think that's a fantastic example, and we've got loads of them, of getting local people to volunteer on rewild, regrow and regreening our borough. The final area was just in terms of recycling. I know that the panel had suggested we have photos of what you can recycle and what you can't, and I know the team have reviewed our guidance, and we do already do that. That's something that we do. And we've also looked at we're looking at the contamination notes, so that if we don't collect your rubbish, you understand why. It's because you've put stuff in it that you shouldn't be putting in it. We are also rolling out food recycling to flats, which should help us even more to get more people recycling. But we've already got a great story, because we are consistently in the top 3 London boroughs when it comes to our rates of recycling. So we're already really, really good at this stuff, but we're looking at getting better. And finally, of course, there's our new Acton site, where we're going to go beyond recycling and try and get residents to reduce their waste in the first place. And that will be our first reuse site in the borough. But thank you very much to the panel, and we do accept all of those recommendations.
Who could possibly be against beavers? It has to be said, and I will therefore, I mean, they've captured the imagination of the residents of this incredible borough, and they've captured the imagination of no less than Sherin Shahzad, who is a pupil in Year 6 at Dairy Meadow Primary School in Southall, who has won the competition this year to be Ealing Council's Christmas card winner. And a glorious picture of one of the Ealing beavers is on the front of that Christmas card, and will be winging its way to certainly everybody in this room, and an awful lot of people out there in the community too, very, very soon. Councillor Newstub.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to say thank you, Councillor Rice, for the work that you and the panel have done, and just to reiterate and celebrate our volunteers, as you've so acutely done. I think we are incredibly lucky. It speaks to our the resilience and brilliance of our residents, but it also speaks to our real leaning into those partnerships where we can work with volunteer groups across the borough in all sorts of different areas, and in particularly in the environmental space. So thank you for celebrating them. We certainly applaud them. And I think Lager Cam mentions, and I'll be off helping them clear up a part of my ward on Friday. So it's always a delight to work with them. So thank you to everything you've done, and in particular for highlighting that great work and partnership that we have with so many of our residents. So thanks.
Councillor Malcolm, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there was a couple of references just then in the discussion about the 50,000 trees that will be planted in the borough. One aspect of that, when I looked at the report, I didn't see any details of any pre-assessments to see the locations of where some of those trees are being dealt with, because if you don't do a pre-assessment, there are some negative effects on some species of animals and creatures. So what pre-assessments did you uncover when you were looking at that particular aspect of the policy? And then secondly, the recommendation 1 refers quite rightfully that visitors should not disturb nesting skylarks on Warren Farm, but the council's own policy actually causes development on that same area. So as chair of the panel, what are your views on that, the contradictory point of view?
Yeah, so I suppose we can just start on on the trees, that we did have discussions on that. And so it's it's gonna be difficult for me to really put words into the mouth of what the officers gave to us on the night itself, and we talked about that. But certainly we are looking at issues to do with species, and there are different issues in terms of how trees affect the area that they're in. I mean, the one point that I made was that there are particular trees that can cause hay fever. Now, I'm a hay fever sufferer, like 49% of the population, and so that's like another thing we need to take into account. And I know that there are very thorough investigations made into what the effects that trees do in a particular area where they are. And so there are other issues that we've brought up as well. We did go to the Grove Farm Nature Reserve, and that was very helpful in having explanations there as to some of the things that we should really be looking out for, even when it comes to planning as well. matters to do with overlooking there are so many matters that you don't really necessarily think about, but I think that we did
Councillor
look
Rice,
into that. Yes.
So I
Yes.
just want to be really clear. So
Yes.
the business of the cabinet meeting
Yes.
is to consider the recommendations of the scrutiny report.
Right.
So the key decision that we're taking and that you're asking us to take is in relation to the recommendations on the report. So I appreciate that members might want to have a discussion about the content of the scrutiny report in and of itself. That's a matter for overview and scrutiny committee, and that's a matter for the scrutiny panel itself. But if we could just focus our attention and our discussion onto Cabinet's response to the recommendations, where you are not content with a recommendation that we have rejected. In this situation, we haven't rejected any recommendations. So can we just get onto that bit of the discussion?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so maybe then we move on maybe to looking at Warren Farm. It's actually interesting because my cousin and our boyfriend, they're over in New York, and I had the chance to see them over the summer. And they work in conservation, and very much their kind of specialism is birds, and working with their colleagues as well. That's what they're very much interested in. I didn't realise New York had so much in terms of mountains and everything else going on there, but I did get the chance to sit down, have lunch with them, and to talk about Warren Farm, to talk about beavers, to talk about all these things with them, and it just was actually great to talk about skylarks, because I could actually just impress them that I had the knowledge about skylarks, these birds that do nest in the ground, because it was just something I didn't really know very much about at all, that there were birds that did nest in the ground in that way. So but the one thing that did come out of that is that, okay, they're very much into conservation. They know about the birds, but they were willing to be open to discussions about how we have to think about conservation and also development, which is necessary. And they were actually open to have that discussion with me about how we may need to build in certain places. So that's one thing that to me is very important, that we need to actually have that discussion. I'm not just a Labour councillor, I'm a cooperative councillor. So I understand about conversation with people and people getting involved. So let's have that conversation. How can we make sure that everything is covered? We cover our nature, we cover our conservation, as well as cover development, which is quite necessary in our borough as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, just a reminder, we're talking about the recommendations on the report in terms of Cabinet's response. To be absolutely crystal clear, like the council is not developing on Warren Farm. We've discussed this issue in depth, and it will be the subject of a future Cabinet report in the not too distant future. There are no intentions of developing on Warren Farm. The only form of development will be the replacement of probably a pavilion covering the net reduction in the overall amount of hard standing that is on that site. Those are the only proposals that are on the table. So I want to make it absolutely crystal clear that, that we are not developing on Warren Farm. And I'm sure we will continue that discussion in the not too distant future in another different scenario. We haven't actually had any of the recommendations rejected, so hopefully there's no form of disagreement in the room right now. And that being the case, if I could direct Cabinet members to the recommendations. Oh. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's do agenda item number 13, final report scrutiny panel 4, genuinely affordable homes. I don't think we've got Councillor Summers online. So what I will do is Councillor Manro and Mahfouz, if you respond to the recommendations, and then we'll take the question from Councillor Malcolm.
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you to Councillor Summers and the councillors on the panel for a wide-ranging breadth of recommendations, everything from the practical through to the strategic, recognising some of those key issues and challenges within the sector, from building safety through to the challenges that we talked about earlier with the private rented sector and our selective licensing scheme. What was clear from a lot of this was that we were already had a lot of this in train, which is fantastic. And there are only 2 recommendations which we've decided to reject. The one that falls into my area is around the request for social housing providers for us to carry out checks on social housing providers. The social housing regulator already exists. That is its role, and we would want to make sure that it is doing it appropriately with those providers. So obviously we wouldn't look to duplicate or step into its remit, and that's the sole reason why we've rejected that particular recommendation, and then the other one sits within Councillor Munro's.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, welcome the report from the scrutiny panel. There's a lot of good work gone into this. The reason why we rejected the feasibility of allocating a certain percentage of housing within 106 developments to the community land trusts. I met with the community land trust a couple of days ago. It really is not feasible for that to happen. 106 is very prescriptive around how and why housing developments will deliver affordable housing and other mitigations of that development. And it would not work in a sense that it's just not feasible for us to be able to allocate on every single development a house, community land trust homes. It wouldn't work that way. They wouldn't want to do it, and it's probably legally not feasible either. So that's why we rejected it. But we are working with the community land trust to find them a site which will be their site for them to deliver those homes, and they can then manage them properly. And we are working with them, and we'll meet with them in the new year to go through that.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you, Chair.
Councillor Munro. Councillor Malcolm, you have a question.
I did have a question. It was answered this morning from the officer, so I don't need to ask it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that basis, and on the basis of the recommendations and the clarification for the rejection, unless there are any other questions or comments from members of the Cabinet, I'll direct you to the recommendations and ask that they're agreed. Thank you very much. That concludes the business of Cabinet. The date of the next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 17th of January. And as that's after Christmas, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a happy, healthy and prosperous New Year.